Order. Questions to the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Duncan Hames.
Number one, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, I've corresponded with a number of ministerial colleagues with a view to running a consultation process and introducing legislation in the second session as part of the government's commitment to transparency, which has already seen us publish details of ministerial meetings, government procurement and a number of other items of public interest.
Duncan Hames.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm sure many of us would welcome that legislation. As the House is periodically reminded, all sorts of people can seek to market their ability to lobby and even secure access to decision-makers. But a voluntary register will only attract agencies seeking to uphold higher standards of practice. Can the Minister assure us that his proposed register will be comprehensive of all those seeking to ply this trade?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Yes, I can confirm that we're going to, when we publish our consultation, it will be clear that we intend these proposals to be comprehensive. We will consult on them widely, which will give all those with an interest in transparency the opportunity to comment on them, which I hope will reassure my honourable friend.
David Hanson.
I don't expect the Minister to prejudge any report from the Cabinet Secretary on the Defence Secretary this week, but would he agree with me that the type of situation the Defence Secretary has found himself in with Mr Werity this week would be exposed very clearly if there was a full, transparent register of lobbyists? And will he agree that should be compulsory and should be introduced as a matter of urgency?
Well, I counted, having said he wasn't going to try and prejudge it, it sounded very much like he did. The Secretary of State was here for an hour yesterday afternoon and gave a very good account of himself. The Prime Minister... yes, he did. I was here for defence questions on his statement. He gave a very good account of himself. As the Prime Minister said, he's doing an excellent job as Defence Secretary. The Prime Minister set up a review by the Cabinet Secretary which will deal with any remaining questions, and the honourable gentleman said, quite rightly, that he doesn't want to prejudge it.
Mr Bob Stewart. Mr Speaker, number two.
Mr Speaker, the European Court of Human Rights has granted an extension to the deadline for implementing prisoner voting rights that was set in the Greens and MT judgment against the United Kingdom. And that's because the court is now considering an Italian prisoner voting rights case, Scopola versus Italy. So it's right to consider the final Scopola judgment in the wider legal context before setting out our next steps on prisoner voting. The government, of course, will express its views on the principles raised in that case, and we will be arguing that it is for Parliament to decide the way forward on this issue.
Bob Stewart. This House has overwhelmingly spoken on this issue. Anyone serving a custodial sentence, and I mean anyone, should not have a vote. I very much hope the Deputy Prime Minister will recognise this appropriately in any further dealings he has on this matter.
Well, as I said to my honourable friend, the first point of principle we're seeking to establish is precisely that it is this Parliament that should be able to determine matters such as this, and that is exactly the point of principle that we will be arguing in the Scopola case, which is before the court right now.
Diana Johnson.
Mr Speaker, why does the Deputy Prime Minister support votes for violent prisoners and not for law-abiding 16- and 17-year-olds?
Well, sir.
I don't.
Andrea Leadsom.
Question number 3, Mr Speaker.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer this question and number 6 together. I refer my honourable friend to the written statement I made on the 8th of September. We plan to make further details, including the terms of reference and the timescale for the Commission, available to the House in the very near future.
Andrea Leadsom.
Does he accept that there are many in England who feel at this time of economic difficulty that fairness is more important than ever? And does he further accept that there are views that MPs involved in English-only issues should be more in the hands of English MPs and less in the hands of MPs from devolved parts of the UK?
I very much agree with my honourable friend. There is a concern expressed by people who live in England about the potential unfairness, which is exactly why we're going to set up this commission, to look very carefully about how the procedures in this House can make sure that that situation is fairer as we pass legislation, and I hope she'll look forward to that detailed announcement in due course.
David Rutley.
Does my honourable friend agree that it's important that the Commission has enough time to report its findings and also for Parliament to consider them before a referendum on Scottish independence that the Scottish Government indicates will take place in 2014 or 2015?
Well, I'm confident that when my honourable friend sees the terms of reference, that he will see that there will be time for the Commission to look at this matter, bring forward its proposals, enable there to be a full discussion with all the political parties in this House, and then for this House to take a decision on how it wants to move forward.
Angus McNeill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister agrees with me that the English are every bit as good as the French and the Germans and can surely govern themselves without any help at all from the Scots. And surely the answer to the West Lothian question is very simple.
There is a very simple answer, and I know what the honourable gentleman thinks it is. I don't agree with him. I think most members of this House don't agree with him, and we will do everything we can to make sure that this United Kingdom stays together.
Mr. Wayne David.
Mr. Speaker, because we have asymmetrical devolution in the United Kingdom, the application of laws agreed by this Parliament is different in different parts of the United Kingdom. Given this complexity, does the Minister believe that it is possible to have different MPs voting on different pieces of legislation without creating total legislative confusion?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, may I welcome the honourable gentleman to his new position. We had a number of conversations on these constitutional matters during the progress of the two previous pieces of legislation, and I look forward to more such conversations. No, he's right. It is a complicated matter. I do sometimes have to stress that to colleagues in this House who think it's simple. It's exactly why we've said that the Commission will consist of experts who understand how this place works, who can balance those complexities, but make sure we end up with a solution that's fairer to England as well as the other parts of the United Kingdom.
Graham Evans.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to take this question along with number 5. And if I could, because I think there's been a lot of misleading coverage recently about the effects of individual electoral registration. If I could take just a minute to explain. This government will do absolutely everything it can to maintain the completeness of the electoral register. This includes phasing in the move to individual registration over 2 years so that people on the register who don't apply under the new system don't lose their vote at the next general election. Every eligible elector will be asked in 2014 to register under the new system, and this will include personal invites to people on the register, inquiries to households, and reminder letters and face-to-face doorstep canvassing. And we're testing data matching to identify people missing from the register and looking at how we can increase the choices people have about how they register. I'm looking forward to the conclusions of the pre-legislative scrutiny and of the consultation, which closes this Friday. But I do, however, have sympathy with the concerns expressed by the Electoral Commission and others about the opt-out proposal, and I'm minded to change these provisions when we bring forward the final legislation.
Evans.
The Prime Minister for that reply. However, it is really important that we make sure that people who do not exist or who are not eligible to vote do not get on the electoral register. Equally, it is important that those who are eligible to vote are registered. Can the Deputy Prime Minister please assure the House that this will happen?
Well, that is precisely the purpose of individual electoral registration, to bear down on fraud in the system. This, of course, is something that the previous government was committed to doing in any event in a few years' time. But like on so many matters now, they seem to somehow shun any responsibility for their failure to act while they were in government, and we are finally here to do the job that they failed to do themselves.
Nick Dubois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Deputy Prime Minister consider bringing forward from 2014 to 2013 the mandatory requirement for new applications joining the register to include the national insurance number?
Our judgment has been, we're bringing it forward in any event, because it would have been under the previous government's plans only introduced until after the next general election. We're bringing it forward to do so within this Parliament, and of course we're trying to get the balance right. It is something that we need to proceed with very thoroughly, and that's why we're doing it carefully, but in a way that means it's fully delivered by the end of this Parliament.
Ruane.
Can I ask the Minister, whose idea was it to remove the civic duty to register to vote? Who made the announcement to the House?
Mr. Speaker, there will be no change at all to the civic duty whatsoever. No, there will be no change to the civic duty at all. Mr. Speaker, I'm quite honoured. This is normally the response they give to former party leaders. But I mean, honestly, just if you listen to the answer. If you listen to the answer, you might quieten down a bit. The civic duty remains exactly as it is. The proposal we have made is that the opt-out would be introduced. The Electoral Commission and others have raised concerns about the possible effect of such an opt-out, and as I just confirmed earlier in my earlier answer, that is a concern which I look at sympathetically. It's the whole point of a consultation, and we will wait to see the final outcome of that consultation, which ends at the end of this week, but I'm minded to change the final legislation to reflect those concerns.
Sadiq Khan.
Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will be aware that all sides of the House share concerns about the current electoral register, and that's why before the last general election there was cross-party support for an agreed timetable to move towards individual voter registration. Now, he refers to the Electoral Commission. It's not simply the opt-out that concerns them, it's also the speeded-up timetable and removing the fines for failing to register that, in their words, will lead to a register that's currently about 92% to one that could be around 65% in many parts of the country, meaning millions of voters being off the register. Now, this will lead to not simply future boundary changes being skewed, but also skewed jury panels as well. Will he do what we did, which is work with all parties, including the Select Committee, to try and reach a proper resolution, which will be the biggest change in the way people are registered since we introduced universal franchise?
Mr. Speaker, I think on certain facts he's just simply plain wrong. So the offence, for instance, which exists in law at the moment to sanction those who don't pass on information as part of the registration process as households will remain. There will be no change to that at all. The civic duty will remain as well. The only thing that we are considering, which I said earlier, is what would the possible effects be of an opt-out. The reason we propose the opt-out is for a very good reason of principle. Under the existing system, registration takes place per household. If, however, you make that a duty on individuals, the question is it right or wrong to give an individual the right to opt out or not? We have proposed that opt-out should exist for individuals. Others have raised concerns about that. I'm listening to those concerns sympathetically, and I've already said that I'm minded to change the provisions in the final legislation. That seems to me to be an example of a government that is prepared to listen and is to hold a sincere consultation process which comes to an end at the end of this week.
Mr. Tim Farron. Would my right honourable friend reflect on the absence of 1.5 million people from the electoral register, those people who are aged 16 and 17, and when can we look forward to a time when those people who can raise a family and get married, those people who can pay taxes, those people who can serve in our armed forces, actually being able to vote too?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, I have personally a great deal of sympathy with that view, but it is not a view that is reflected in the coalition agreement. It is not a view shared across government, but clearly it is a debate which we will continue to have on all sides of the House.
This question I call Graham Morris.
Mr. Speaker, and it's in relation to this issue of compulsion. The Electoral Commission has already said that to move to individual electoral registration without compulsion will see the registers fall from over 90% complete. Well, this is what the Electoral Commission say. You're nodding your head. To 65%. Ethnic minorities, young people, the urban poor to be disenfranchised. Now, apart from gerrymandering the constituency boundaries, fixing the election timetable, and now letting millions of people fall off the register, Tories stay in power for a generation.
Mr. Speaker, instead of lurching towards ludicrous conspiracy theories, I really think he should look at the facts. The Electoral Commission did not say what he is. No, the Electoral Commission raised a specific concern about the opt-out. Their specific proposal was that the opt-out should be retained, but should be made more difficult. What we're now going to look at is either that variant from the Electoral Commission or getting rid of the opt-out altogether. That is precisely what, in a spirit of openness, I'm now saying that we're reflecting on, and will then be reflected in the final version of the legislation.